This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Previously, on Jennifer Love Hewitt, Please Be on Our Show. The events of the past 6 to 8 months hadn't been a dream. They were real, and she was still caught in the middle of something far beyond her understanding. Jennifer took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever was to come.
Nowhere to run. Jennifer Love Hewitt stood frozen, her mind racing as the massive ship loomed over their small boat. The spotlight's beam illuminated the dark waters, blinding her and Drew Barrymore. The cold, mechanical voice repeated its chilling demand. Jennifer Love Hewitt, surrender the artifacts, or we will take them by force. The dream, the strange adventures that had haunted her mind for months, had somehow bled into reality. And now, here she was, trapped in the middle of the ocean with Drew Barrymore, being hunted by mysterious forces that seemed to know far more about her life than she did. Drew, usually calm and collected, was tense beside her, her gaze darting between the ship and Jennifer. "We need to move, Jen. Now." But where, Jennifer asked, her voice shaking. "That ship, there's no way we can outrun them. I don't even know what they want. I don't have any artifacts." Drew glanced over her shoulder at the ship closing in, then back at Jennifer. "It's not about what you have, it's about what you can do, and what they think you know." Jennifer's heart pounded as she tried to make sense of Drew's cryptic words. But there was no time for questions, no time to understand the situation fully. She had to act. The spotlight was growing brighter, the ship drawing closer. "What do we do?" Jennifer asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Drew looked around desperately before pointing to a small, dark inlet just beyond the ship's reach. "There. Head for the rocks. If we can lose them in the fog, we might have a chance." Jennifer swallowed hard and nodded. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the boat. She knew this was a desperate plan, but there were no other options. She could hear the low rumble of the ship's engines now, the deep, rhythmic thudding of heavy machinery echoing across the water. Without wasting another second, Drew lunged forward and took control of the boat's small motor, steering them sharply toward the inlet. The boat shuddered as it picked up speed, slicing through the waves and into the thick fog that curled ominously around the rocks. Jennifer crouched low, bracing herself as the boat rocked violently in the churning water. Her pulse raced and her mind spun with fear and confusion. Was any of this real? Was she still dreaming? Or had she truly stepped into a nightmare that she couldn't escape? "Hold on tight," Drew shouted over the roar of the waves. "This is going to get rough." The boat surged forward, the wind whipping through Jennifer's hair as they veered dangerously close to the jagged rocks. She could feel the mist on her face, cold and damp, mingling with the salty spray of the ocean. Behind them, the ship's spotlight swept through the fog, searching for them with relentless precision. The voice crackled through the loudspeaker once again, more insistent this time. "You cannot escape. Surrender the artifacts. You have no other choice." But Drew was not about to give up. She maneuvered the boat expertly, guiding them deeper into the fog and away from the ship. The lights faded, the sound of the engines growing fainter as they disappeared into the dense mist. For a moment it seemed as though they had evaded their pursuers. The fog closed in around them like a protective shroud, muffling the sounds of the world outside. Jennifer allowed herself a brief sigh of relief, her pulse beginning to slow. But then, the boat jolted violently. Jennifer's breath caught in her throat as she clung to the side of the boat, her fingers digging into the cold metal. What was that? Drew glanced over the side, her eyes narrowing. "We hit something, a rock, I think. I'll try to steer us around it." But before Drew could react, the boat lurched again, this time with more force. The front of the vessel dipped precariously, and Jennifer felt her stomach drop as the bow scraped against something submerged beneath the water. Suddenly, the boat was caught in a fierce current, dragging them toward the rocks with terrifying speed. Jennifer's heart pounded in her chest as the waves crashed against the sides of the boat, sending freezing water splashing over the edge. "We're going to crash," Jennifer cried, panic rising in her throat. Drew gritted her teeth, her hands white-knuckled on the wheel. "Not if I can help it." But the boat was no match for the power of the ocean. With a deafening crunch, they slammed into a submerged rock, the impact throwing Jennifer to the deck. She gasped as the wind was knocked from her lungs, her vision blurring from the force of the fall. For a moment, everything was still. Jennifer lay motionless on the wet deck, her ears ringing and her body aching. She could hear the distant sound of waves crashing against the rocks, the wind howling through the fog. But for the first time in hours, there was no sign of the ship. Drew's voice cut through the haze. Jen, are you okay?" Jennifer groaned as she struggled to sit up, her head pounding. "I think so," she managed to say, though her body protested with every movement. Drew knelt beside her, her brow furrowed with concern. "We've got to get out of here before they find us. The boat's wrecked, we're not going anywhere in this." Jennifer glanced at the mangled front of the boat, now partially submerged in the shallow water. The engine sputtered and died, leaving them adrift in the fog. "What now?" Jennifer asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Drew stood, scanning the foggy shoreline. "We're not far from land. We'll have to swim for it." Jennifer's heart sank. She was exhausted, soaked to the bone, and terrified of what lay ahead. But there was no other choice. With a deep breath, she nodded. "Let's go." The island. Jennifer and Drew waded into the freezing water, the sharp rocks beneath their feet making each step painful and treacherous. The fog was so thick that they could barely see a few feet in front of them, but Drew seemed to have an idea of where they were going. As they swam through the icy water, Jennifer's mind raced with questions. Why had these people come after her? What artifacts were they talking about? And how had Drew Barrymore become involved in all of this? Her body shivered uncontrollably as the cold water seeped into her bones, but she forced herself to keep moving. They had to reach land. They had to figure out what was happening. After what felt like an eternity, Jennifer's feet touched solid ground. She stumbled onto a rocky shore, gasping for breath and shivering violently. Drew followed close behind, pulling herself onto the shore with a grim expression. "We're here," Drew said, her voice tight with exhaustion. "But we need to keep moving. It won't take them long to figure out where we've gone." Jennifer nodded weakly, too cold and disoriented to argue. She followed Drew up the rocky incline, her legs shaking with each step. As they climbed, Jennifer noticed the landscape shifting. The rocky shore gave way to a dense forest, the trees towering above them and shrouded in mist. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the forest was eerily silent. "Where are we?" Jennifer asked, her voice barely audible over the sound of her labored breathing. Drew didn't answer at first, her eyes scanning the dark forest ahead. Finally she spoke, her tone cautious. "We're on an island, off the coast. I know this place. But it's been years since I was here." Jennifer frowned. "You've been here before." Drew nodded, her gaze distant. "A long time ago, it was part of the plan. Part of what they were working on." "What plan?" Jennifer pressed. "Drew, you've got to tell me what's going on." Drew hesitated, glancing back toward the shore, as if expecting the ship to appear at any moment. Then, with a sigh, she turned to Jennifer. "All right. I'll tell you. But you're not going to like what you hear." Jennifer's pulse quickened. "I don't care. I need to know the truth." Drew took a deep breath. "Remember how I told you that you're connected to all of this? The artifacts, the people chasing us, they're all tied to something much bigger, something ancient." Jennifer nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "The artifacts are real," Drew continued. "They're powerful objects, things that have been passed down through history, hidden away because of the danger they pose. Whoever controls the artifacts controls unimaginable power. The kind of power that can reshape the world." Jennifer swallowed hard. "And I'm connected to these artifacts. Why?" Drew's gaze softened. Because of your family. Your ancestors were part of a secret group, a group dedicated to protecting the artifacts, keeping them out of the wrong hands. That's why they're after you. They think you're the key to unlocking the full potential of the artifacts. Jennifer felt the ground sway beneath her. But I don't know anything about that. I've never even heard of these artifacts until now. They don't care, Drew said quietly. They think you know more than you're letting on. And they'll do whatever it takes to get that information. Jennifer's mind reeled with the weight of Drew's words. Her family? Secret groups? Ancient artifacts? It all seemed too impossible, too far-fetched to be real. But the fear in Drew's eyes was unmistakable. What do we do now? Jennifer asked, her voice trembling. Drew's jaw tightened. We find the artifact. The one they've been hunting for. Jennifer blinked. What? You mean there's one here? On this island? Drew nodded. It's the last one. The most powerful of them all. And we have to get to it before they do. The hidden temple. The island's dense forest stretched before them, a maze of towering trees and twisting vines. Drew led the way, her movements quick and purposeful, though Jennifer could sense the tension in her every step. Jennifer followed close behind, her thoughts swirling with everything she had just learned. Her family's connection to the artifacts, the secret group dedicated to protecting them, it was all too much to take in. She felt as though she had been thrust into a world she didn't understand, a world that was both terrifying and exhilarating. As they made their way deeper into the forest, the air grew cooler, and the sounds of the island faded into an eerie silence. The trees pressed in on them, their branches tangled like ancient fingers reaching out to grab them. Finally, after what felt like hours of walking, Drew stopped in front of a large stone structure, half hidden by vines and moss. The entrance to the structure was carved into the side of a cliff, its massive stone doors flanked by crumbling statues of long-forgotten gods. This is it, Drew whispered. The temple. Jennifer stared at the imposing structure, her heart pounding. Are you sure this is the right place? Drew nodded. This is where the last artifact is hidden. We have to find it before they do. Jennifer's stomach churned with nerves, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had come this far, there was no turning back now. They approached the entrance to the temple, the heavy stone doors looming over them like ancient sentinels. Drew hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the door, before pushing it open with a low groan of stone against stone. Inside, the air was cool and musty, the scent of damp earth and decay filling Jennifer's nostrils. The temple's interior was vast, its walls lined with intricate carvings that told the stories of long-lost civilizations. Faint light filtered through cracks in the ceiling, casting eerie shadows on the floor. We need to move fast, Drew said, her voice barely above a whisper. If they find us in here, we're done for. Jennifer nodded, following Drew deeper into the temple. Her heart raced with each step, her senses on high alert for any sign of danger. The corridor they followed was narrow and winding, the walls closing in around them as they ventured further into the darkness. Jennifer's footsteps echoed off the stone, each sound amplified in the cavernous space. Finally, they reached a large chamber at the heart of the temple. In the center of the room, resting on a pedestal of polished stone, was the artifact, a gleaming, golden object that seemed to pulse with energy. Jennifer stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. That's it! Drew nodded, her eyes fixed on the artifact. That's it. Without warning, the sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor behind them. Jennifer's blood ran cold as she turned to see several figures emerging from the shadows, their faces obscured by dark hoods. They found us, Drew whispered, her voice tight with fear. Jennifer's heart pounded in her chest as the figures moved closer, their footsteps deliberate and menacing. She glanced at Drew, her mind racing. What do we do? Jennifer whispered, her voice barely audible. Drew's jaw clenched. We fight. Before Jennifer could react, the figures lunged toward them, weapons drawn. Drew moved with lightning speed, engaging the attackers in a flurry of motion, but Jennifer was frozen, her mind blank with terror. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her arm, yanking her toward the pedestal. "Get the artifact," Drew shouted. "Now!" Jennifer's pulse raced as she reached for the golden object, her fingers closing around its cool surface. The moment she touched it, a surge of energy shot through her, filling her with a strange and unfamiliar power. The temple seemed to shake around them, the walls trembling as the energy from the artifact spread through the air. The attackers faltered, momentarily disoriented by the surge of power. "Jen! Let's go," Drew shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the exit. Jennifer stumbled after her, the artifact clutched tightly in her hands. They raced through the corridors, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls as the sound of collapsing stone filled the air. The temple was falling apart, the energy from the artifact destabilizing its ancient structure. Jennifer could feel the ground shaking beneath her feet, the walls cracking and crumbling as they ran. Finally, they burst through the temple doors and into the open air, just as the temple collapsed behind them in a cloud of dust and rubble. Jennifer gasped for breath, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. She stared at the artifact in her hands, its golden surface gleaming in the moonlight. "We did it," Drew said, her voice filled with disbelief. "We got the artifact." But Jennifer's relief was short-lived. The sound of engines filled the air, and she turned to see a convoy of black SUVs speeding toward them across the rocky shore. "They're coming," Jennifer whispered, her heart sinking. Drew grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the forest. "We have to keep moving. We can't let them catch us." But as they ran, Jennifer's mind was filled with questions. What was the artifact? Why was she connected to it? And how much longer could they run before they were caught? The call. Later that night, after hours of running and hiding, Jennifer and Drew found refuge in an abandoned cabin on the island. They barricaded the door and sat in the dimly lit room, catching their breath. Jennifer cradled the artifact in her hands, her mind racing with everything that had happened. She couldn't believe how much her life had changed in such a short amount of time. As she sat there, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, half expecting another message from the mysterious number. But this time, the screen displayed a different message. "Government number, we're coming for you." Jennifer's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the message. Before she could react, her phone rang. The caller ID flashed government number once again. Jennifer hesitated for a moment before answering, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hello," she whispered, her voice trembling. On the other end of the line, there was only static at first. Then, through the crackling noise, she heard the same sounds from her earlier dream. The clanging of metal, the low moan of a ship's horn, and the faint voice of a child. "Jennifer," the voice whispered, "we need your help. It's not over." Jennifer's blood ran cold as the line went dead. She stared at the phone in her hand, her mind spinning with fear and confusion. Drew glanced over at her, her expression concerned. "What is it? What's wrong?" Jennifer swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. They said, "It's not over." To be continued. That night, as Jennifer drifted off to sleep, she was pulled into a vivid vision, one that felt far too real to be another dream. She found herself standing in a dimly lit room, the air thick with the scent of incense and age. The walls were lined with old books and strange artifacts, their shadows flickering in the soft candlelight. At the center of the room stood an elderly woman with silver hair tied into a neat bun, her piercing blue eyes fixated on Jennifer. It took a moment for Jennifer to recognize her. This was her great-grandmother, a woman she hadn't thought about in years. Her great-grandmother had passed long before Jennifer could form any real memories of her, but here she was, standing before her, as if the years had never taken her. Jennifer. Her great-grandmother said in a voice that was both soft and commanding, "The dreams you've had are not merely hallucinations. Our family has been the guardians of these artifacts for generations. They hold great power. But that power comes with a terrible cost. You are being drawn into something far bigger than yourself, something our bloodline has been tied to for centuries." Jennifer's pulse quickened, a cold sweat forming on her brow as the weight of the words settled in. Her great-grandmother stepped closer, her face etched with concern. "There are forces that seek to use you to unlock the full potential of the artifacts, forces that will stop at nothing. You must." But before she could finish, the vision began to blur, her great-grandmother's form fading into shadow. Jennifer gasped as her surroundings dissolved into darkness, her heart pounding as a cold voice echoed in her mind, "They're coming for you, Jennifer. And this time, there's no escape."
This has been a Rogue Media Network production. Are you a podcaster? Let's talk podcast hosting. Are you tired of your current podcast host? Need real support in a community that gets it? At Rogue Media Network, we offer top-tier podcast hosting services to help you thrive. From hosting and distribution to dedicated support, we've got you covered. Starting as low as $25 a month. Join our community of passionate podcasters today. Contact us at hello@roguemedianetwork.com.